Hi, good evening, Mr. Edens. It's me, Kanan Dimson. I'm a sophomore from Forney High School, and my topics that were assigned to me was the definition or define psychology, and then the hindbrain. This here is my dad. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sam Dimson. I'm Kenan's dad. I have an older daughter. Her name is Isabella. She's a sophomore at Arizona State in the business school. Kenan is my number two. As he said, he's a sophomore here in Forney. And then I have a number three. His name is Maxwell, and he is 12 in the sixth grade. Professionally, I work for a consulting firm, senior director, doing financial reconstruction and uh, I guess helping distressed bankruptcy companies. That's what I do. Excited to be here and help Kanan the best we can.
So, yes, that's just a little bit about my dad. Prior to this, he hasn't had very much, I'd say, exposure to psychology or any type of psychology classes. So, we're both excited today to learn about psychology.
Yeah, the only exposure I had was 30 years ago in college. So maybe when I was about a little bit older than Kanan. That must have been about it.
Yep. So, starting off about psychology, my two talks once again were psychology, define psychology, and the high brain. I'm gonna go ahead and start off with psychology. So, in psychology, I mean, really, we're gonna have to start with what happened in the beginning. How did psychology become what it was? And so, psychology, first off, wasn't even called psychology. It was actually started off as philosophy, because the difference between the two, actually, real quick, is philosophers couldn't really measure thoughts or feelings or how our brain really worked, but psychology has made it possible to where we are able to study feelings, thoughts through many different ways that I'll get into later into the video. But starting with the very, very first even concepts of psychology, but it was technically philosophy, was Plato and Aristotle, some very famous names. But yeah, Plato really wanted to focus on how the mind worked, and Aristotle, as a student, followed in his footsteps, obviously. But Plato had an ideology that the soul has three parts, also known as the psyche, is what he called it. And so the three parts was the logisticon, which was intellectual process, the fact that we're conscious and can think. And then the second part was sorry, I can't pronounce this one very well, the epitheuticon.
So what?
I'm really bad at it. But that one really, that part of our soul is more of the wants and desires of what our body and mind wants to really do. And then the last part would have to be the I can't read that one. Homeides? Yeah. And
Sound it out.
it would be the thomosides. And that's really just about how we feel, like emotion wise.
So those are the three parts.
Yes, those are the three parts that Plato had really gave us the founding steps on. So those are the three parts that he believed in.
That was more psychology or more philosophy?
That was more philosophy, because they couldn't actually back up what was happening.
Because they couldn't measure those three parts.
They couldn't measure what was happening. And then his student, Aristotle, he did more observation on how we learn. He wanted to see how our mind can really not necessarily develop, but evolve and adapt to what is happening. And so he wanted to figure out how we could learn things and then also retain that information. And so that was really like the earliest foundation or the earliest beginnings of psychology, but wasn't psychology yet because we hadn't understood a way to explain how those are happening.
No measurements, no
Yeah,
way of tracking.
we didn't have any measurements until around like the Renaissance period, where we had Rene Descartes. Sorry, I'm not good at pronouncing names, but he came up with the ideology of our mind and our body are two separate things.
Okay.
We have our body, which is a physical substance, and then we have our mind. And our mind was the source of thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. And so, with those thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, it would interact with the body. And when it interacted with the body, these two would make behavior. And so, this is really where we started to see how our mind could produce certain outcomes, as in like our thoughts or our emotions. And this is where studies started to pick up on how humans reacted and acted with other humans.
Wait, so what's the separation of the body and the mind again?
The separation of the body and the mind. The body is a physical substance. So he believed, as in, the mind and body were not the same thing. They were two separate things.
Okay.
And then the mind was more of like where we get our learning, where we get our emotions, and where we get our firm found beliefs.
So when you combine the two, what do you get?
Whenever you combine the two, you will end up getting behavior. So how we act, how we interact with other people, it'd be like more behavior based off of emotion and how we really can display or show what we truly feel.
What's the difference between behavior and emotions?
Well, behavior is how we interact with others.
Okay.
What we do based off of an initial stimuli. So something that stimulates us to act or do something in a certain way.
Towards others.
Towards others or in your own mind. So if you were...
But wouldn't that be an emotion?
It would be an emotion, but emotions that are acted upon is a behavior.
Okay.
So whenever you turn the emotion into an action or a, not necessarily way of life, but a process of thought, will make it behavior.
It's kind of very complex.
Yeah, it's a lot of psychology. It's how our brain works.
Okay.
But yeah, so from there, we, like I said, studies really picked up and got into three major branches of psychology. Starting with the earliest one, it was structuralism. Structuralism wasn't founded by Wilhelm Wundt, but founded by one of his students.
By who?
Wilhelm Wundt.
Wilhelm?
Yes.
Like William?
Yes.
But Wilhelm.
Wilhelm. Wilhelm Wundt was one of the first self-proclaimed psychologists of all time.
Okay.
So he was the first that laid foundations and understanding of like our like peripheral sensory and like our nervous system, how we behave, how our mind and body behaves, through being able to back up his studies of really just how the mind and body works.
Okay, so if we're transitioning from philosophy to psychology, and this William guy, and you said the difference between the two is the ability to measure, what is it that he was measuring?
He was measuring, he didn't have the technologies that we have today. I'll get to that later. So like how he used MRIs and stuff like that to study what the brain does. But he was the first to be able to back.
How did he back it up?
How did he back it up?
Yeah, I mean, if you're moving, it's structuralism, right?
Well, structuralism wasn't founded by him. It was founded by one of his students.
Okay.
I was going to get to that. He kind of proposed the idea and got the snowball rolling.
Okay.
To where
Well, I hope one of his students figure out how to measure it then.
Yeah, his students obviously did.
Okay.
But
So they put measurements around structuralism.
yes.
All right.
Yes.
I'll wait to hear that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm about to touch on. So structuralism was all about psychological processes that are made of basic elements or structures, hence where the name structuralism came from. So the way that they tested this was by using introspection. So introspection is whenever you have people do mental mental tasks that make them really use their brain, and then we would ask for feedback and have them give us what they experienced or what they saw, heard, to kind of give us a beginning on how the mind structural processes worked. So the way that we backed it up was by doing multiple tests of introspection on different people to see if the data or results line up.
So what would be an example? You ask somebody something and then you ask them how they felt about it afterwards?
Well, no, what we would do is like you would have somebody read a book. So if you gave them a book and they were saying, okay, yes, I can read and I see white lines on black paper. Or sorry, not white lines on black paper, but
Black letters.
black letters on a white paper. Whenever we told them, how do you interpret this? What's making you understand what's going on? They couldn't give us an answer. So that's what we dived in to study on.
Dove into study.
Dove into study on. But yes, whenever we asked them, how is your mind able to do this? They couldn't give us an answer. And so that was a big stepping stone leading us to kind of the next branch of psychology, which is functionalism. Functionalism was really how the mind and consciousness continues and keeps changing while we have no, I'd say, understanding of it. So like when you breathe, do you think about breathing?
No, it's just an automatic.
Something that happens, right?
Yes.
So if I told you to read a book, could you tell me how you know what's being, could you tell me how what the author wrote is being translated to your brain?
Not like the steps, but you just know your brain is able to process those letters into words and those words into sentences and then you understand them.
Exactly.
But you don't know how it happens.
And that is because of our consciousness.
Okay, I think.
Yeah.
So you got what? Structuralism?
Structuralism, and then it led to functionalism. So really, in more simpler terms, functionalism is stuff that we do without knowing how we're doing it.
Okay. And then structuralism is?
Structuralism, that's how psychological processes are, that's like explaining that psychological processes are effects of, or causes of, no, effects of basic elements or structures.
Okay. I think I understand.
You're starting to get it a little bit more?
A little bit.
Okay. And then, last but not least, functionalism, or really...
Wait, the structuralism, functionalism.
Structuralism, functionalism.
I think there was a third one.
There's another one
Okay.
that we're going to get to. But really quickly, functionalism really want to understand is kind of in the name. How does, not how. How was structuralism? Functionalism is why does the mind work.
Okay.
So how does the mind work? Why does the mind work?
Okay.
So this is really mainly studying why we feel a certain way or act a certain way during relationships, or how we not necessarily feel, but how the brain processes emotion.
Okay.
So that was functionalism.
What's the third one?
Now we're going to go down the road to behaviorism, which is one of the more recent paths of psychology that started around the early 20th century. So behavioralism...
Who's following behavioralism?
Who founded it?
Uh-huh.
It was really a lot of people that shifted towards behavioralism, but behaviorism, sorry.
A
But
lot of people, like people on the street.
no, like groups of psychologists.
Okay.
But it was really brought to the light by Ivan Pavlov.
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 Is that like that Pavlovian dog thing?
Actually, yeah, it is. His main study was about dogs, and I'll get to that in a
Everybody
second.
knows that one.
Yep.
Pavlovian dogs. I used to do that to you guys.
But no, behaviorism, which Ivan Pavlov, we'll get to him in a second, but he was like a founding father to it. It was made specific by only studying behavior. It's in the name, really. So if you look back, structuralism, basic mind structures. Functionalism, why and how, not how, why does a mind work? Why does it have these functions? Behaviorism, why do we behave?
Why do we behave?
Well, why do we behave a certain way?
Okay.
Yeah. And so, Ivan Pavlov, like you've heard, the Pavlovian dogs, he...
Remember Sochi? We used to do that at Sochi. I put that steak in front of Sochi. Sochi was our dog. I'd make him sit with that bone in front of him, and definitely he would salivate until I gave him the command to go ahead and attack it.
So yeah, it sounds like he already knows a little bit about this, but...
Because he couldn't control the response. It was just...
He couldn't.
Salivate. Everything. That's one thing I learned about. I remember about psychology.
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Ivan Pavlov taught his dogs how... Not how, but he conditioned them to where whenever they heard a bell, which he used to condition them with, whenever they heard a bell, they knew that it was time to eat. So they'd sit there patiently and wait till they were served food. And it got to the point to where even where if the dogs just heard a bell that wasn't even rung by him, that they would start salivating because they had conditioned that
behavior.
that action and behavior of eating with the bell. And so, lastly, after behaviorism and functionalism and structuralism, moving on to one of the more recent times, we have cognitive psychology, which is still studied today and still practiced today.
What is cognitive psychology?
Cognitive psychology is the study of internal mental processes like perception or decision making or problem solving.
Okay.
So that's why it's still studied today, because we're still making tougher decisions and solving more new problems that come along just from day to day.
Not necessarily tougher decisions. We're just solving new problems.
Solving new problems, yeah. Okay. And so
you're having to think about how to solve a problem.
Yeah.
So cognitively is more just how you apply your brain to solve a problem?
Yeah, like they want to see how the brain plays in a certain activity that you're doing, as in like problem solving.
What do you mean by plays?
So the way that cognitive psychology is backed up is from using MRI scans. So whenever we...
So now you're talking about using true measurements through
technology to see what role each different parts of the brain play in
a type of behavior.
Yes.
Okay.
In an activity, and the main ones being decision making, perception, and problem solving.
So they use technology to measure cognitive behavior.
Yes.
How do they measure behavioralism?
Behaviorism? That was a while ago in the 20s.
I know, but you said the transition from philosophy to psychology was measurement. So if behavioralism, how was behavioralism measured?
They documented responses through how often a response was, or a response that was given to them, how often it happened, and how, if there was a different response, how it differed from the original responses, and if there's any variables in their experiment that changed that.
Okay. What was the way that structuralism was measured?
Structuralism was tested by introspection. So they again recorded data of asking people to do mental tasks.
And then functionalism, how was it measured?
Functionalism was It was a little bit of data, and then they started to increase the amount of people they were doing in experiments to get a more precise result. So based off of, we have this many more people, how many more times does this event or action or behavior happen?
Okay. So what's the order again?
So it goes starting with structuralist. Well, it started all the way back
And all
as
the way back, the measurements part of it.
the measurements part. So it was data.
No. Is it the order of not philosophy but psychology? Structural,
Functionalism, behaviorism, cognitive.
Okay.
Yes. So once again, just in a quick summary of things, psychology was and still is the study of mind and behavior. It's now grown very large, as we can see, and there's now different branches of psychology like social behavior, cognitive processes. There's sports psychology, health psychology, and human development psychology. And so all these touch on how our mind is working, behaving, interacting with different things, really. So how you interact with or think when you're involved in a sport, or how you interact with other people, when you're doing a sport, things like that.
Okay.
And so that's really all I've got on psychology. Now I'm going to move towards the hindbrain.
Okay. You want to pause it and take a break before we start the hindbrain?
No, we'll be good.
Okay.
Let's finish her up. And so, what all do you know about the hindbrain?
I don't know anything or much about the hindbrain.
Anything. Could you take a guess at where the hindbrain is?
Is it in the back?
Yep, the back of your brain. You've got all this right there.
The hindbrain.
The hindbrain. So, in the hindbrain, there's 4 main parts. These parts are cerebellum, pons,
Okay.
the medulla, and then, or medulla oblongata, and the reticular formation.
Okay.
So all these 4 parts play a major role in really being alive. And we'll break that down a little bit deeper.
Okay.
But the hindbrain plays a large part psychologically wise.
Psychologically wise?
Yes.
Is that a word? Psychologically? Well, I think you can say all 4 play a role psychologically, but you don't have to say wise. Yeah.
Psychologically,
Period.
in the ways that they show emotion, help us feel emotion or respond to things.
Okay.
And so starting off with cerebellum, the words actually...
Where is my cerebellum?
Cerebellum is around, well, it's obviously in the back, but it looks like a little brain under the medial lobe in your brain.
Okay.
So it's tiny, and it's actually Latin for little brain. And so if you look at a picture, you will see your brain, and then you'll have one tilted at like a 90-degree angle, and it's like another brain.
Okay.
And this coordinates all of your movement, balance, and muscle memory. So this is very important motor-wise. So if you do any sort of movements, any type of balancing in your everyday life,
You don't even think about it.
you don't think about it. You need your cerebellum.
So your little brain's doing all that.
Your little brain's doing all of it. If you play any sort of sport, baseball, soccer, softball, volleyball, any of it, and you have a muscle memory of doing something like kicking a ball or making a pass in football, this is all stored in your little brain, your cerebellum.
So if you're playing soccer.
Sorry, Professor Edens, my phone unfortunately stopped recording for some reason.
I can vouch for that. It did just stop.
But last part that we were on was the cerebellum, and you said you had a question?
Yeah, you were talking about how to control movements and stuff. So if you were playing soccer and you miss the ball and you trip and fall, can I say, hey, Cannon, why is your little brain not working?
You could,
Okay.
because that does include, it has my motor memory and it has my balance.
So that's what I'm going to say from now on. I'm going to ask why your little brain is not working when you're playing soccer.
Okay. Also, in your cerebellum, your motor memory, which is a big part of it, can be affected. So things like alcohol, you see why they tell you don't drink and drive, because driving is a muscle memory, and alcohol is affecting your cerebellum whenever it's being used. It affects your motor memory and your balance. So that's a really big reason why they stress don't drink and drive.
Okay.
And so moving on
You just screwed up. Can't see.
a little bit. Okay. Moving on is the pons. Actually, let's go to reticular formation. Reticular formation isn't really talked about too much.
What is it?
But the reticular formation is the part in your brain beneath your cerebellum where it consists of just being vigilant. It holds the parts where it has all of our alertness, and for animals like the predator and prey, really. So what it does is,
That the fight or flight.
yeah, it's kind of like fight or flight. It's just about being alert in the situation that you're in and what decisions you need to make to keep yourself safe, really.
Okay.
Next, we have
What's it called?
the reticular formation
Okay. Where is it?
beneath the cerebellum.
Okay.
We're all going down now. And then we've got the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is, like I said earlier, what keeps us going, like what keeps us alive, really. This is why we need the hindbrain. What's important is because of the medulla. The medulla regulates heart rate, regulates breathing, a lot of your involuntary processes or like reflexes. So,
The things you do, you don't have to think about.
yes. So some will confuse that with the spinal cord, because everyone's like, oh yeah, your spinal cord, that has a lot to do with your reflexes, but it controls reflexes like sneezing, coughing. It's stuff that whenever your brain or your nose is like, I have dust follicles, like I gotta get it out, it's responsible for causing you to sneeze.
Wait, your spinal?
No, your medulla oblongata.
Okay.
And so, yeah, if you can just remember, the medulla oblongata is our essentials: heart rate, respiratory, certain reflexes.
Okay.
Lastly, we got the pons. This is Latin for bridge. It is the part between our brain and our spinal cord. So it connects a lot. We've got things called cranial nerves. There's 12 of them, and I'll get into that.
You're going to get into each one of the 12?
Yeah, I'll give you a rundown on what they are.
Okay.
And so your cranial nerves, you go through your pons, and those are really just nerves that control reactions or reflexes.
Okay.
So if we want to start there, we can. There's 12 of the major nerves, like I said. But these are really nerves that control senses or movement.
Okay.
Starting off with our first is our olfactory nerve, and it relays smell.
Okay.
So everything you smell is because of that nerve that runs through the pons. Second, we've got the optic nerve.
Sight.
Sight, there you go. And then third, we have the oculomotor nerve that controls our eye movement. So every time we see, we are using our oculomotor nerve.
Ocular?
Ocular.
Ocular.
Ocular. Yeah, ocular motor nerve.
There you go.
And then we have our trochlear, supplies muscles to the eye, actually. I was reading the next one. That's what
Yeah, I was like, that's not your eye.
I was reading the next one. Then we have our trigeminal, that's chewing and sensation inside of your face. So anytime you're, that's that nerve. And then we have our abducent nerve, which is lateral eye movement. So that's sideways. And then our optic is like visual information, and forward is what we're taking in. That was the second one. And then we have our facial muscle nerve.
Pretty
Expressions. Yeah, so really just happy, sad, all the movement through there. But yeah, that's taste buds, blinking, all of that.
Right, through your facial nerves?
Through, yeah. So you've got
Tasting?
facial expression, your taste buds, you have sensations through like your fingers and toes, you have blinking, so that's all from that nerve right there.
Okay.
Then we have our auditory nerve, hearing. So taking in any type of audio information, and then it also has balance. That's why on cruise ships, if you're ever feeling seasick, they put that right behind that little
That makes sense.
seasick dot behind your ears. And then this one I have to read. It's the glossopharyngeal sensation. So, or the glossopharyngeal nerve, and that just is sensation. So whenever you feel something, that's from that nerve right there. Then we have the 10th, which is the vagus.
Vegas? Like Las Vegas?
No,
Is that the gambling nerve?
No,
I
VAG.
go gambling with my Vegas nerve?
No, that's all of your organs in your chest.
Oh.
So, just heart, lungs, all of that. And then we have 11th. The 11th nerve is the accessory nerve. It supplies 2 of your neck muscles. So, getting to do all this, move around from that nerve. And then we have the hypoglossal muscle, the hypoglossal nerve, and that does movements for the muscles of your tongue, and then the rest of your neck.
Okay.
So that's all your cranial nerves that stem through your pons,
So why are we talking about the hindbrain as part of psychology?
because it relays a lot of
Isn't
our
that neuroscience?
I mean, it's talked about in neuroscience, but we talk about it because it has a lot to do with our emotions,
Okay.
how we feel, and it displays our emotions. So like whenever you
makes sense.
smile, or how you feel whenever you taste something that's good or bad. If your heart rate skyrockets whenever you see someone you like, that's all because of these.
Okay.
And so those four different regions in our brain make up our hindbrain.
Okay.
And then you've got the medulla and the pons put together. That's our brain stem. So if
Okay.
you've ever heard the term brain stem, that's the medulla and the pons.
Okay.
So that little bridge, and then you've got all your essentials
Okay.
as your brain stem. And then those are located, the medulla is located in the myelencephalon part of your brain.
And what is that?
Then, like I said,
all
right here,
there.
the
Okay.
bridge, and right above it. And then you've got your cerebellum, remember that? Your Latin little brain. That's located in the metencephalon,
Okay.
which is right above it,
All right.
where you get all of your information from.
Okay. I learned a lot.
You learned a lot?
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay.
Tried.
My biggest takeaway is when you fall, they'll say, "Why's your little brain not working?"
Yep, my little brain is thrown off right now. But yes, thank you, Mr. Edens, Professor Edens, for letting me turn my work in like this, even though the phone stopped. That was my online check-in for the final of Defining Psychology in the Hindbrain.
All right.
Thank you.
Good job.